Before we descend into the labyrinth of smoke-filled rooms and classified betrayals that define this case, if you enjoy uncovering the lost files of the Cold War and the hidden histories of espionage, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue to bring these declassified narratives into the light. In the autumn of 1979, the Central Intelligence Agency was a fortress under siege, not from armies, but from doubt. The Senate hearings of the mid-70s had stripped away the mystique of the spy game, leaving an organization that was paranoid, bureaucratic, and deeply protective of its remaining secrets. Within the beige corridors of the Langley headquarters, trust was a currency that had suffered hyperinflation. It was worthless, and everyone hoarded what little they had. It was into this atmosphere of institutional anxiety that Elias Thorne arrived every morning. Elias was 26 years old, a junior analyst in the Soviet Russia division. He was not a field agent. He did not carry a weapon, nor did he know how to lose a tail in a crowded bazaar. He was a creature of paperwork, a man with a mind that functioned like a relentless actuary. His job was not to steal secrets, but to organize them. He collated reports on Soviet grain harvests, tracked the movement of rolling stock on the Trans-Siberian Railway, and cross-referenced the names of mid-level bureaucrats in the Kremlin. It was tedious, unglamorous work, the kind of logistical sifting that constitutes 90% of intelligence gathering. But Elias Thorne had a specific talent, one that his superiors had noted during his recruitment at Yale. He noticed absences. He could look at a stream of data and see not what was there, but what was missing. The silence in a radio frequency, the gap in a travel manifest, the sudden cessation of a diplomat's credit card usage. His boss was Arthur Vance. If Elias was the machinery of the agency, Arthur Vance was its soul. At 55, Vance was a legend of the clandestine service. He had served in Berlin during the airlift, had run networks in Vienna in the 50s, and had advised presidents during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Vance was the deputy chief of the Soviet division, a man with silver hair, impeccably tailored suits, and a voice that sounded like gravel moving under a heavy tide. He was the mentor every young analyst dreamed of having. He was tough, intellectually rigorous, and seemingly possessed of a moral compass that pointed true north, regardless of the political weather. Vance had taken Elias under his wing 6 months earlier, moving him from the grim basement offices of logistics to the 7th floor's analytical hub. He told Elias that the future of the agency wasn't in the cowboys who ran guns in the jungle, but in the scholars who could predict the fall of an empire by counting its rivets. Elias worshipped Vance. He viewed him as the last of the patrician spies, a man who understood that the Cold War was not just a conflict of power, but a conflict of philosophy. The relationship was paternal. Vance would often invite Elias into his office late on Friday afternoons, pouring 2 glasses of scotch and lecturing him on the history of Russian statecraft. They discussed the czars, the Bolsheviks, the paranoia of Stalin. Vance seemed to understand the Russian mind better than the Russians themselves. He spoke of the KGB not with hatred, but with a professional respect, describing them as grandmasters in a game where the board was constantly changing shape. For Elias, working for Arthur Vance was the pinnacle of his young life. It validated his long hours and his solitary existence. He felt he was part of a lineage. But in the intelligence world, lineage is often a cover for complicity. Elias didn't know it yet, but he was studying at the feet of a man who had already sold the classroom to the enemy. The unraveling began not with a gunshot or a dramatic revelation, but with a receipt. It was October 14th, 1979. The leaves in Virginia were turning the color of rust. Elias was working late, preparing a briefing book for the director regarding Soviet naval maneuvers in the Baltic. Vance had left for the day, attending a diplomatic function in Georgetown. He had left a stack of administrative files on Elias's desk, travel vouchers, expense reports, and unclassified correspondence, asking the young analyst to file them before he went home. It was busy work, a test of loyalty that Elias was happy to perform. He was sorting through a travel voucher from Vance's recent trip to Brussels. The trip had been official business, a NATO intelligence summit. The dates were standard. Departure on September 4th, return on September 8th. The receipts were meticulously organized: hotel, per diem, taxi fares. But as Elias stapled the taxi receipt to the voucher, his eyes snagged on the timestamp. The receipt was from a taxi company in Zurich, not Brussels. It was a small thing, a mistake, surely. Perhaps Vance had taken a side trip to visit a contact, or perhaps he had simply grabbed the wrong receipt from a previous trip. But Elias's mind, trained to catch the smallest inconsistencies in Soviet grain quotas, snagged on the detail. He looked at the date on the Zurich receipt. September 6th, the middle of the Brussels summit. Elias checked the official itinerary. On September 6th, Vance was scheduled to be in all-day meetings with British and French counterparts at the NATO headquarters. There was no record of a flight to Switzerland. There was no explanation for why the deputy chief of the Soviet division would be in a taxi in Zurich, 400 miles away from where he was supposed to be saving the free world. Elias sat in the empty office, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. He held the piece of paper, the ink slightly faded. A normal person would have thrown it away or filed it without a second thought. A loyal employee would have assumed there was a classified explanation he wasn't privy to. But Elias Thorne was cursed with curiosity. He didn't file the receipt. He slipped it into his pocket, and in doing so, he took the first step toward dismantling the life of the man he admired most in the world. The next morning, the receipt burned a metaphorical hole in Elias's pocket. He arrived at Langley early, his eyes red-rimmed from a lack of sleep. He had spent the night staring at the ceiling of his small apartment in Alexandria, constructing innocent explanations for Arthur Vance. Maybe it wasn't a taxi receipt. Maybe it was a courier service. Maybe the taxi company in Brussels had a subsidiary in Zurich and used the same billing pads. But the analyst in him rejected these comforts. He needed data. When Vance arrived at 8:30 a.m., he was as charismatic as ever. He greeted the secretaries by name, joked about the terrible coffee, and clapped Elias on the shoulder as he passed his desk. "Big day, Eli," he said. "The director wants that Baltic assessment by noon. Make me look smart." "Yes, sir," Elias said, his voice sounding thin to his own ears. He watched Vance walk into his office and close the heavy oak door. The normalcy of the interaction was jarring. If Vance was hiding something, he wore his deception like a second skin. Elias waited until lunch. He knew Vance usually took a long lunch on Tuesdays, playing squash at the agency gym or meeting contacts at the exclusive clubs in D.C. Once Vance was gone, Elias went to the records department. He didn't have high-level clearance for personnel files, but as Vance's aide, he had administrative access to the travel logs. He pulled the files for the Brussels trip. The official report was clean. It listed the attendees, the agenda, the outcomes. But Elias dug deeper. He requested the communication logs, the record of secure cables sent and received by the Brussels station during the summit. He scanned the logs for September 6th. There were dozens of cables, routine traffic. But then he noticed a gap. Between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m., there were no cables signed off by Vance. The logs showed that his deputy had handled the traffic during those hours. 5 hours. Enough time to fly to Zurich and back? No, it was too tight. Unless he hadn't flown commercial. Elias requested the logs for agency transport. The CIA maintained a small fleet of aircraft in Europe for executive transport. These flights were often off the books for standard auditing but were recorded in the logistics database for maintenance purposes. He found it. A Beechcraft King Air had been checked out of the Brussels airfield at 10:15 a.m. on September 6th. Destination, generic training flight. Pilot, redacted, but the mileage logged for the training flight was exactly the distance required for a round trip to Zurich. Elias felt a cold sweat prickle his hairline. Vance had taken an agency plane, off the books, to Switzerland during a NATO summit. Why? Zurich was the banking capital of the world. It was also a known hub for intelligence exchanges, a neutral ground where East met West in the shadows of the Alps. Was Vance meeting a source? If so, why hide it from the official log? Vance ran the Soviet division. He could authorize almost any meeting he wanted. He could have claimed he was recruiting a Swiss banker or meeting a defector. The secrecy implied that the meeting wasn't for the agency, it was for himself. Elias returned to his desk, his hands trembling slightly. He tried to focus on the Baltic assessment, but the numbers swam before his eyes. He was looking at a man he thought was a patriot and seeing the outline of a mercenary. That afternoon, Vance called Elias into his office. The sun was slanting through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of light and shadow. Vance was sitting behind his desk, reading the draft of the Baltic report. "This is good work, Eli," Vance said, not looking up. "Your analysis of the submarine refitting schedules is particularly sharp. You caught a discrepancy the naval intelligence boys missed." "Thank you, sir," Elias said. He was standing in front of the desk, trying to keep his breathing even. Vance looked up, removing his reading glasses. His eyes were a piercing blue, intelligent and unreadable. "You seem distracted today. Everything all right at home?" It was a casual question, but coming from a master interrogator, it felt like a spotlight. "Just tired," Elias lied. "Didn't sleep well." Vance nodded slowly. "Insomnia is the occupational hazard of this building. We deal in secrets, and secrets don't like to sleep. They like to pace around in your head." He leaned back in his chair. "Take the afternoon off after you file this. Go get some fresh air. That's an order." "I'm fine, really," Elias protested, terrified that leaving would look suspicious. "Go." Vance smiled, a warm, fatherly expression. "You're no good to me if you burn out before you're 30. Elias left the office feeling a mix of relief and guilt. Vance was being kind to him while he was investigating him. It felt like a betrayal. But as he walked to his car in the vast parking lot, Elias realized something else. Vance's advice about secrets pacing around in your head wasn't about Elias. It was a projection. Vance was the one with the insomnia. Vance was the one pacing. The investigation had begun with a receipt, but now it was fueled by instinct. Elias decided to widen his net. He wouldn't just look at the Brussels trip. He would look at everything. Every trip, every expense, every unexplained absence for the last 2 years. He would build a timeline of Arthur Vance's life, and he would see where the holes were. Over the next 3 weeks, Elias Thorne lived a double life. By day, he was the diligent assistant, filing reports and laughing at Vance's dry jokes. By night, he was a forensic accountant of treason. He stayed late at the office, claiming he was catching up on backlogs, but in reality, he was pulling archived files from the central registry. He couldn't take documents out of the building. The security checkpoints were too strict, so he memorized them. He memorized dates, flight numbers, and hotel names. Then, when he got home to his apartment, he wrote them down in a series of notebooks he kept hidden under the floorboards of his linen closet. The pattern that emerged was subtle, brilliant, and terrifying. Vance didn't disappear for days at a time. He wasn't that careless. Instead, he carved out dead time within legitimate missions. A 3-hour layover in Frankfurt that turned into 6. A morning off in London for personal time to visit a tailor. A late arrival to a conference in Rome. Elias cross-referenced these windows of time with known Soviet intelligence activity. This was the hardest part. He had to access the counterintelligence logs, files that were technically above his pay grade. He used a social engineering trick Vance himself had taught him. Confidence. He walked into the archives of the counterintelligence division, carrying a clipboard and looking bored, and told the clerk he needed the blue files from 1978 for a retrospect report Vance was writing. The clerk, recognizing Vance's name and seeing Elias's badge, handed them over without a blink. Elias scanned the logs. He was looking for the movements of known KGB officers in Europe. Specifically, officers from the 1st Chief Directorate, the elite branch responsible for foreign intelligence. The correlation was not perfect, but it was there. On November 12, 1978, Vance had a 6-hour layover in Paris. On that same day, Oleg Krivov, a KGB residency chief, was spotted by French surveillance entering a bistro in the 7th arrondissement. On March 4, 1979, Vance was in Vienna for a trade summit. On that same evening, a signal site, a location used for electronic bursts of data, was activated in the Vienna woods, monitored by the NSA. There were 7 instances in 2 years where Vance's dead time overlapped geographically and chronologically with high-level KGB activity. It wasn't proof. It was circumstantial. A defense attorney would tear it apart. But to an analyst, it was a signal in the noise. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't the meetings. It was the finances. Elias knew Vance's salary. It was a government-grade GS-15, comfortable but not wealthy. Vance lived well, a large house in McLean, a sailboat on the Chesapeake, children in private universities. Elias had always assumed Vance came from family money. He had that air of old wealth. Elias began to dig into public records. He went to the courthouse in Fairfax County during his lunch breaks. He pulled property tax records and mortgage deeds. He found that Vance had paid off his mortgage in full in 1976, a lump sum of $80,000. In 1976, that was a fortune. Where did a civil servant get $80,000 in cash? Elias traced the payment. It hadn't come from a bank transfer. It had been a cashier's check from a bank in the Cayman Islands. The picture was forming. Vance wasn't just meeting Russians, he was being paid by them, and he had been for years. The betrayal wasn't recent, it was foundational. Elias felt a profound sense of nausea. He thought about the lectures on Friday afternoons, the discussions about patriotism and duty. Every word Vance had spoken to him had been a lie, or perhaps not a lie, but a performance. Vance was acting the part of the perfect spy so well that he had fooled everyone, perhaps even himself. But why? Why would a man like Arthur Vance, a war hero and a Cold Warrior, turn? It wasn't just the money. The money was a perk, but it wasn't the driver. Men like Vance didn't sell their country for a sailboat. Elias suspected it was something deeper. Ego. The belief that he was smarter than the system he served. Or perhaps disillusionment. Vance had seen the dirty wars, the coups, the assassinations. Maybe he had decided that there was no moral difference between the CIA and the KGB, so he might as well play both sides and profit from the chaos. Whatever the reason, Elias knew he was in dangerous waters. He was investigating a man who had the power to crush him with a phone call. If Vance found out, Elias wouldn't just be fired. He could be framed. He could be sent to a black site. Or he could have a car accident on the George Washington Parkway. Elias needed insurance. He needed to talk to someone. But who? The director? Vance played golf with the director, the FBI. Bringing the Bureau into the agency was a cardinal sin. If he was wrong, his career was over. He was alone. And then, the phone rang. It was late at night. Elias was in his apartment staring at his notebooks. He picked up the receiver. Elias. Vance's voice was smooth, calm. I need you to come in early tomorrow. We have a situation in Kabul. Yes, sir, Elias said, his heart hammering against his ribs. I'll be there. And Elias? Yes, Arthur. Bring those travel logs you've been working on. The ones from the archive. I think we need to review the Brussels trip again. I recalled something that might be important. The line went dead. Elias stared at the phone. Vance knew. Somehow, he knew. The drive to Langley the next morning was a blur of gray highway and internal panic. Elias debated turning the car around and driving north, disappearing into Canada. But he knew that was an admission of guilt. He had to face Vance. He had to bluff. When he entered the office, the atmosphere was frantic. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was in its early stages. Troop movements on the border, puppet government instability. The Kabul situation was real. It wasn't a trap, at least not entirely. Vance was in the conference room, surrounded by maps and generals. He looked energized, commanding the room with absolute authority. He spotted Elias and waved him over. Thorne, get on the secure line to the Islamabad station. I need confirmation on the armored divisions moving through the Salang Pass. Elias nodded and went to work. For 6 hours they were in the eye of the storm. There was no mention of travel logs or Zurich receipts. It was pure crisis management. Elias watched Vance work and felt a confusing surge of admiration. The man was brilliant. He was orchestrating a massive intelligence response, predicting Soviet moves before they happened. How could this man be a traitor? How could he serve the enemy while simultaneously fighting them so effectively? It was the paradox of the double agent. To be valuable to the KGB, Vance had to be valuable to the CIA. He had to rise. He had to be the best. His competence was his camouflage. At 2 p.m., the room cleared. The generals went to the White House to brief the president. Vance and Elias were left alone in the conference room, the air thick with cigarette smoke. Vance loosened his tie and poured a glass of water. He looked at Elias, his eyes hard. You didn't bring the logs, Vance said. Elias froze. Sir? Last night, I asked you to bring the travel logs, the ones you pulled from the archive. Elias's mind raced. I didn't think it was a priority, sir. With the Kabul situation, Vance walked around the table and sat on the edge of it, looming over Elias. Detail is always a priority, Elias. You know that. That's why I hired you. You notice the small things. He let the silence hang. It was a tactical silence, designed to induce a confession. I noticed you've been spending a lot of time in the records department, Vance said softly, checking out files that have nothing to do with your clearance level. I was doing background research, Elias stammered. For the retrospective, like you asked. I asked for 1978, Vance said. You pulled 1976 through 1979. You pulled my flight manifests. You pulled the blue files. Vance leaned in closer. Who are you working for, Elias? The question took the air out of the room. Vance wasn't accusing him of investigating him. He was accusing him of being a mole. It was a brilliant deflection. If Elias admitted he was investigating Vance, he looked insubordinate. If he denied it, he looked guilty of spying. I'm not working for anyone, Elias said, his voice gaining a sudden, desperate strength. I found an inconsistency, the Zurich receipt. I just wanted to clear it up before I filed it. I didn't want you to get in trouble with the auditors. Vance studied him. He looked for the tell, the twitch of the eye, the sweat on the lip. Elias held his gaze. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. You were protecting me? Vance asked, skepticism dripping from the words. Yes, Elias lied. You're my mentor. I thought maybe you were having an affair or gambling. I didn't want it to end up in a report. Vance laughed. It was a short, sharp bark. An affair? You think I have time for a mistress? He stood up and walked to the window. You're a good kid, Elias. Loyal. But you're digging in trash cans. Stop it. The Zurich trip was a sensitive channel, authorized by the director, but off the books. If you keep pulling threads, you're going to unravel something that protects national security. He turned back to Elias. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Elias said. Good. Burn the notes you took. Forget the receipt. And never go behind my back again. If you have a question, ask me. I will. Get out of here. Go home. Elias left the room. He walked to the elevator, his legs feeling like rubber. Vance had bought the lie, or pretended to. But the threat was clear. Stop digging, or else. But Elias knew something Vance didn't. Vance had lied about the director authorizing the trip. Elias had checked the director's private scheduling logs too. There was no meeting, no authorization. Vance wasn't protecting national security. He was protecting himself, and by confronting Elias, he had confirmed that he had something to hide. The game had changed. It was no longer an investigation. It was a hunt. Elias knew he was burned at the office. Vance would be watching him now. Every file he requested, every phone call he made would be monitored. He couldn't investigate from the inside anymore. He had to take it to the street. He decided to conduct physical surveillance. It was a ridiculous idea. Elias had no field training. He drove a beat-up Ford Pinto that was about as stealthy as a parade float. But he had one advantage. He knew Vance's schedule better than Vance's wife did. He knew that every Thursday night Vance stayed in the city for a poker game with Old Navy buddies. Elias had never verified this game existed. On the following Thursday, Elias waited in his car 2 blocks down from the agency exit. At 6:01 p.m., Vance's black sedan rolled out. Elias gave him a long lead, letting 2 cars get between them. He followed Vance onto the George Washington Parkway, heading toward D.C. Vance didn't go to a private club or a residential neighborhood. He drove into Georgetown. He parked on a side street near the canal. Elias parked 3 blocks away and ran back, keeping to the shadows. The streets were slick with rain. Elias shivered in his trench coat, feeling like a cliché from a noir film. He saw Vance walking briskly, carrying a leather briefcase. Vance stopped at a newsstand, bought a paper, and then walked down to the towpath along the C&O Canal. It was a classic location for a brush pass or a dead drop. Dark, multiple exits, limited visibility. Elias watched from behind a bridge piling. Vance walked to a specific bench, sat down, and placed the briefcase next to him. He opened the newspaper and began to read. It was dark, cold, and raining. No one read a newspaper in those conditions. 10 minutes passed. Elias's heart was pounding so hard he thought Vance might hear it across the canal. Then a jogger approached, a man in a gray hooded sweatshirt. He slowed down as he passed the bench, stopped to tie his shoe, and sat down on the other end of the bench. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. After 2 minutes, Vance stood up. He left the briefcase on the bench. He took the newspaper and walked away. The jogger remained. He waited 30 seconds, then slid over, picked up the briefcase, and jogged away in the opposite direction. Elias was paralyzed. He had just witnessed a handover. A senior CIA official had just given a briefcase, likely filled with classified documents, to an unknown asset. He had to make a choice. Follow Vance or follow the jogger. Vance was the target, but the jogger was the evidence. If Elias could identify the jogger, he could prove the connection to the KGB. Elias took off after the jogger. He kept his distance, moving through the wet leaves along the path. The jogger was fit, moving fast. Elias, asthmatic and out of shape, struggled to keep up. The jogger ran for a mile, then exited the canal path onto M Street. He slowed to a walk, checking his watch. A car pulled up to the curb, a gray sedan with diplomatic plates. The jogger opened the back door and tossed the briefcase inside, then got in. As the car pulled away, Elias sprinted under a streetlight, straining to see the license plate. He caught the first 3 letters, FC7. He stopped, gasping for air, hands on his knees. FC. That was the diplomatic code for the Soviet Union. He had him. He had the visual confirmation. Arthur Vance was passing material directly to the Soviet embassy. But as Elias stood there in the rain, a black car slowed down next to him. The window rolled down. Elias turned, expecting to see Vance. It wasn't Vance. It was a man he didn't recognize. A thick neck, a broken nose. The man looked at Elias, memorizing his face, and then the car sped off. Elias realized with a jolt of terror that the Russians had counter-surveillance. They were watching the drop, and they had just seen him. Elias didn't go home that night. He checked into a cheap motel in Maryland under a fake name, paying cash. He sat on the lumpy bed, staring at the rotary phone. He was in over his head. The Russians knew his face. Vance suspected him. He had no allies. He needed to escalate this. But to whom? He thought about the FBI. The Bureau had jurisdiction over domestic espionage. But going to the FBI was a nuclear option. If he walked into the Hoover building and accused the deputy chief of the Soviet division of treason, they would arrest him, not Vance. They would think he was crazy, or a crank. He needed hard evidence, physical evidence. The briefcase was gone. The receipts were circumstantial. He needed something from Vance's end. He remembered the office. Vance had a safe in his office, a heavy GSA-approved safe where he kept active files. But Vance also had a personal safe at his home. Elias had seen it once during a Christmas party. It was in his study behind a painting, a cliché, but Vance was a traditionalist. Breaking into the home of a CIA chief was suicide, but Elias was out of options. He knew Vance was currently at the poker game, or debriefing with his handlers. His wife was away visiting their daughter in college. The house should be empty. It was 11 p.m. Elias drove to McLean. He parked a mile away and walked through the woods that bordered the wealthy estates. He reached the perimeter of Vance's property. The house was dark. Elias had no burglary tools. He had a credit card and a desperate prayer. He tried the back door. Locked. He tried the windows. Locked. Then he remembered the basement. Vance had a wine cellar. The delivery chute for the coal, converted to storage, often had a loose latch. Elias found the chute, pried it open with a rock, and squeezed through, landing on a pile of drop cloths. He was inside. He crept upstairs, the floorboards creaking like gunshots in the silence. He made his way to the study. He found the painting, a seascape of the Maine coast. He swung it aside. The safe was there, a Sargent and Greenleaf dial lock. Elias didn't know how to crack a safe. He stared at it, defeated. All this risk, and he was stopped by a tumbler. But then he looked at the desk. Vance was meticulous. He was arrogant. He believed he was untouchable. Elias opened the top drawer of the desk. Pens, paper clips, a pipe cleaner. He checked under the desk blotter. Nothing. He pulled out the books on the shelf behind the desk. The History of the Peloponnesian War, the Gulag Archipelago, the Great Game. He pulled down a copy of Dr. Zhivago. It fell open. Inside, the pages had been hollowed out. Sitting in the cavity was a small notebook. Elias grabbed it. It wasn't a code book, it was a ledger, handwritten columns, dates, amounts. Zurich, $10,000. Vienna, $15,000. Dead Drop 4, $5,000. And names. Real names of CIA agents operating in Moscow. Next to some names were check marks. Next to others were crosses. The crosses meant compromised, or worse, liquidated. Elias realized he was holding a death list. Vance wasn't just selling documents, he was selling people. He was selling the identities of American spies to the executioners in the Lubyanka. Elias shoved the notebook into his jacket. He turned to leave. The lights in the driveway turned on. A car door slammed. Vance was home early. Elias froze. He heard the front door open, the sound of keys on a silver tray, Vance's heavy footsteps on the hardwood. "Hello?" Vance called out. "Patricia." He must have seen a light or heard a noise. Elias looked around the study. There was no exit that didn't lead past the hallway where Vance was standing. He dove into the closet. It was a deep walk-in closet, filled with winter coats and old uniforms. Elias buried himself behind a rack of wool overcoats, curling into a ball in the darkest corner. He held his breath. Vance walked into the study. Elias could see a sliver of light through the crack in the door. Vance hummed a tune, something classical. He walked to the desk, the sound of a drawer opening, then a pause. Vance had noticed the book. Dr. Zhivago was on the desk, not the shelf. Elias hadn't put it back. The humming stopped. "Clever boy," Vance whispered. It wasn't a question. He knew. Vance opened the drawer, the metallic click of a gun being checked. "Elias?" Vance said, his voice conversational. "I know you're here. I saw the mud on the carpet downstairs. You never did learn to wipe your feet." Elias didn't move. He pressed his hand over his mouth. "Come on out," Vance said. "Let's have a drink. We can talk about this. It's not what you think. It's more complicated." Elias knew it wasn't complicated. It was simple. If he came out, he died. Vance began to move around the room. He was hunting. He checked behind the curtains. He checked under the desk. He walked toward the closet. Elias gripped the notebook. He looked around for a weapon, a coat hanger, a shoe. Vance's hand touched the doorknob of the closet. Suddenly, the phone on the desk rang. The sound was deafening. Vance paused. He let go of the knob and walked back to the desk. He picked up the phone. "Yes?" Vance's voice shifted instantly to professional command. "When?" "God damn it. All right, I'm coming in. Don't touch anything until I get there." He slammed the phone down. "Saved by the bell, you little bastard," he muttered. Vance grabbed his keys and ran out of the room. Elias heard the front door slam and the car roar away. The agency had called. A crisis. It had saved Elias's life. Elias waited 10 minutes, shaking uncontrollably. Then he ran. He ran out of the house, through the woods, and back to his car. He drove without headlights for the first mile. He had the ledger. He had the proof. But now, he was a hunted man. Elias knew he couldn't go to the CIA. Vance controlled the narrative there. He needed an outsider. He drove to a payphone at a gas station in Maryland. He dialed the number of the FBI field office in Washington. He asked for the counterintelligence squad. "I have evidence of a mole in the CIA," Elias said. "A senior official. I have the ledger." The agent on the line was skeptical. "Who is this?" "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm an analyst. The mole is Arthur Vance." There was a silence on the line. "Arthur Vance? You're accusing the deputy chief of the Soviet division." "I have his handwriting. I have dates. I have the money trails. And I have a list of compromised agents." "Where are you?" "I'm not telling you. Meet me. Public place, 3 a.m., the Lincoln Memorial, by the statue." "We'll be there." Elias hung up. He knew it could be a trap. The FBI and CIA were rivals, but they also protected the establishment. But he had to trust someone. He arrived at the memorial at 2:45 a.m. The massive marble Lincoln sat in judgment in the dark. Elias sat on the steps, the notebook clutched to his chest. At 3 a.m., 2 cars pulled up. 4 men in suits got out. They didn't look like friends. They looked like trouble. One of them approached. He was older, with a weary face. He showed his badge. "Agent Miller, FBI. You Thorne?" "Yes." "Show me the book." Elias handed it over. Miller opened it under a flashlight. He flipped through the pages. His expression hardened. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered. "This matches the chatter we've been hearing from the defector in Helsinki." He looked at Elias. "You realize what you've done? You've just decapitated the CIA's Soviet operations." "He was selling us out," Elias said. "He was getting people killed." "I know," Miller said. "Get in the car. You're in protective custody now." They drove him to a safe house in Virginia. For the next 3 days, Elias was debriefed. He told them everything. The receipts, the logs, the dead drop, the break-in. The FBI verified the ledger. They matched the payments to offshore accounts. They matched the liquidated agents to men who had disappeared in Moscow. The case was airtight, but arresting Arthur Vance wasn't simple. He handled the nation's deepest secrets. If he sensed the net closing, he might defect. He might run to the Soviet embassy and be flown out to Moscow before they could touch him. They needed to catch him in the act. "We need you to go back," Miller told Elias. "Back where?" "To work. To the office." "He knows," Elias said. "He found me in his house." "He suspects," Miller corrected. "He didn't see you. He thinks you have the book, but he doesn't know who you've told. If he runs now, he loses everything. He's arrogant. He thinks he can talk his way out of it or fix it. We need you to play dumb. We need you to flush him out. He'll kill me. We'll be watching. We'll have a wire on you." Elias looked at the gray walls of the safe house. He had no choice. The only way out was through. Walking back into CIA headquarters was like walking into a lion's den wearing a steak suit. Elias was wired with a Nagra recorder taped to his lower back. He went to his desk. He waited. At 9 a.m., Vance arrived. He looked tired. The crisis the other night had been real. A defector in Berlin had gotten cold feet, but Vance seemed distracted by other things. He saw Elias. He stopped. "My study is a mess, Elias," Vance said quietly. "Someone was looking for reading material." "I don't know what you're talking about, Arthur," Elias said. The FBI had told him to use the first name, to break the deference. Vance smiled, a cold, reptilian smile. "I think you have something of mine, a notebook." "I have insurance," Elias said. "That's what I have." Vance walked over to Elias's desk. He leaned down. "Insurance is only good if you're alive to file the claim. Give me the book, Elias, and I can get you a posting in London, Paris, anywhere you want. A fresh start." "Like the fresh start you gave Jim Miller?" Elias asked. Miller was a name in the ledger with a cross next to it. Vance's face twitched. "Jim was careless. He was going to get caught anyway. I just accelerated the process." "You sold him." "I traded him," Vance hissed, "to protect the network. You don't understand the game, boy. Sometimes you sacrifice a pawn to save the king. You're not the king, Arthur. You're the board. You're letting them play on you." "I am the game," Vance whispered. "I have kept the peace for 20 years by balancing the scales. The Russians know what I want them to know. We know what they want us to know. It's equilibrium, and you're threatening to tip it over." "The FBI is listening, Arthur," Elias said. He couldn't help it. He wanted to see the fear in the man's eyes. Vance froze. He looked at Elias's chest. He reached out and ripped Elias's shirt open. He saw the wire. Vance didn't panic. He didn't run. He just looked at Elias with infinite sadness. "You poor fool," Vance said. "You think the FBI can touch me? I know where the bodies are buried. All of them." Vance turned and walked calmly toward the elevator. "He's moving," Elias yelled to the empty room. "Take him down!" The FBI team was in the van outside. They heard the confrontation. They swarmed the lobby. But Vance didn't go to the lobby. He took the elevator to the basement garage. He had a reserved spot near the exit. He got into his car. The security gates were closing. The FBI had triggered the lockdown. Vance rammed the gate. His heavy sedan smashed through the wooden barrier. He was out. The chase was on. It wasn't a high-speed pursuit. It was a chess match played at 60 miles an hour. Vance headed for the DC border. He wasn't going home. He was going to the embassy. The Soviet compound on Tunlaw Road. It was sovereign territory. If he made it through the gates, he was gone. Elias was in the passenger seat of Agent Miller's car. They were 3 cars behind Vance. "He's heading for the sanctuary," Miller shouted into the radio. "Block the intersection at Wisconsin Avenue." Vance was driving with precision, weaving through traffic. He knew the routes. He knew the timing of the lights. They reached Georgetown. The Soviet embassy was only a mile away. "We can't let him enter," Miller said. "If he crosses that line, it's a diplomatic incident. We have to stop him." "Ram him," Elias said. "I can't just ram a civilian car." "He's a traitor! Ram him!" Vance turned onto Tunlaw Road. The massive iron gates of the Soviet compound were opening. They were expecting him. He had signaled them. Miller floored the accelerator. The FBI car surged forward. Vance was 50 yards from the gate. 40. Miller swerved, clipping the rear bumper of Vance's car. Vance's car spun. It hit a parked delivery truck with a sickening crunch of metal. The sedan careened onto the sidewalk and slammed into a lamppost. Steam hissed from the radiator. The gates of the Soviet embassy began to close. The Russians had seen the crash. They were abandoning him. They didn't want a scene on their doorstep. Vance stumbled out of the wrecked car. He was bleeding from the forehead. He looked at the closing gates. He looked at the approaching FBI agents. He reached into his jacket. "Gun!" Miller screamed. The agents drew their weapons. But Vance didn't pull a gun. He pulled a cigarette case. He opened it, took out a cigarette, and lit it with a shaking hand. He leaned against the ruined car, smoking, as the agents surrounded him. Elias got out of the car. He walked up to the circle of guns. Vance looked at him. The blood ran down his face, staining his white collar. "Checkmate, Eli," Vance said softly. "Well played." Arthur Vance was not taken to a police station. He was taken to a secure facility at Quantico. There was no press conference, no headlines. The arrest of a CIA deputy chief was a shame the government wanted to bury. The interrogation lasted for weeks. Elias watched some of it from behind the glass. Vance was cooperative. He had no loyalty left to protect. He detailed every document he had sold, every agent he had burned. He dismantled the Soviet division's operations with the same efficiency he had built them. He explained his motivation. It wasn't ideology. It wasn't just money. "I was bored," Vance told the interrogators. "We were fighting a war that never ended. Nothing moved. I wanted to make things happen. I wanted to feel like I had agency. When you control the flow of information to both sides, you become God." It was narcissism, pure and simple. He had treated the Cold War as his personal entertainment. Elias listened and felt a hollowness in his chest. He had idolized a monster. The trial was a closed tribunal. Classified evidence. Vance pleaded guilty to espionage. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He was sent to the Supermax in Florence, Colorado, to a unit where the inmates never saw each other and never saw the sky. The CIA went into damage control. They purged Vance's staff. They recalled dozens of agents. They changed codes that had been in use for a decade. Elias was not fired. He was a hero, technically. He had caught the mole. But in the CIA, nobody likes a snitch, even a righteous one. Elias walked the halls, and people stopped talking when he entered the room. They looked at him with suspicion. If he could take down Vance, he could take down anyone. He was dangerous. He was promoted, given a raise, and moved to a basement office in the archiving division. It was a soft exile. They buried him in paper so he couldn't cause any more trouble. 5 years later, in 1984, Elias Thorne was working late in the archives. He was 31, but he looked older. His hair was thinning. He drank too much coffee and slept too little. He received a letter. It had been forwarded through 3 different secure channels. It was from Florence, Colorado. He opened it. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. "Dear Elias, I hear they put you in the basement. A waste of a good mind. but poetic in a way. We both ended up in boxes. I don't write to apologize. I did what I did. But I wanted you to know one thing. That day in the office when I told you to go home, I wasn't trying to manipulate you. I genuinely wanted you to get out. This life, it eats you. It ate me a long time ago. You were the only real thing I saw in that building for 10 years. You won. But ask yourself, what did you save? The game goes on. The pieces just change color. Regards, Arthur. Elias folded the letter. He looked around the basement at the rows of filing cabinets stretching into the darkness. Each cabinet held a million secrets, a million lies. Vance was right. The game hadn't stopped. The Cold War was colder than ever. New men were sitting in Vance's old office, making the same calculations, perhaps making the same mistakes. Elias took the letter and fed it into the shredder. He watched the paper turn into confetti. He picked up a file from his desk, a report on Soviet grain shipments for 1984. He opened it. He looked for the patterns. He looked for the silence. Because that was all he knew how to do. He was an analyst. And somewhere in the noise, there was always another truth waiting to be found.